All right. Welcome, everyone. Good evening in India, good morning in the US and other parts of the world. I'm super excited to host this session as part of Jack Hacks and to share my experiences doing YC and being in startups. There's a lot to cover. I'm gonna be breaking down the entire process of how I even got into startups in the first place, especially being an international student, where I grew up in Dubai and then I went to the US for my bachelor's. um, and yeah, I'm just super excited to kind of share and talk more about this. So I have a quick presentation which I'll be going through. Super excited to kind of talk through this. So I'm just gonna share my screen. Awesome. Yeah, you should be able to see my screen now. And also, this is like a live stream, so it's a little bit hard to navigate and see if there's any questions or something. But I want this to be as interactive as possible. So please do, type in any questions you have in the chat, and I'll try to go through most of them as I do the talk. Um, but yeah, just, to introduce myself, I'm Wetzel. I'm a CS and business student at the University of Michigan. And I really got into startups right before my freshman year. So I did schooling in Dubai, and I was just, always interested in building things, and just I was good at math, I was good at sciences, but I did not really have this entrepreneurship pursuit. I actually just wanted to, get a big tech job and kind of go down this pathway that everyone glorifies, and it's kind of the standard pathway people follow. So that was kind of how I went into college. However, I was lucky enough to work with a startup called Twin Mind back in 2024. And they actually launched the startup 3 months after January, so like in March. And the founder was my mentor at Wolfram Summer School, which I did in grade 11. So that's how I was kind of connected to him. And then he, reached out to me and told me about his new company. So I joined as the youngest intern at the age of 17. And after that, I got to work with a beautiful team for almost 2 years, from like May 2024 to August 2025. And the experience was really, amazing, because there's so many talented people around you, and it just motivates you to work harder and learn a lot from people. Also, I'm just gonna double check and see if you guys can hear me fine. So yeah, if you just want to, type in the comments if the speech is good. Um, but that kind of experience got me into building things, and I started doing a lot of hackathons. So I actually met my co-founders at Carnegie Mellon's hackathon in February of 2025, and we built this tool that lets influencers to create videos and post on social media. And that was kind of the first version of this product, which we built in 24 hours. But we not did not really like take it forward until July, in that summer, where we attended, YC Startup School, and just got to speak to a lot more potential customers and develop our product. After which we applied to YC in August for the fall 25 batch. And yeah, it was crazy as we ended up getting in. And I was just 18 at that time last year. So it definitely was a very shocking thing, but the experience was amazing. We got to hear, from partners and VCs, and it was just an incredible moment. And more so, like, it's 3 months of learning that no college degree can actually teach you, because you get to be in the real world and do things without the safety net that school gives you, right? And I just want to kind of walk through some of the things I learned in YC, because many people on Instagram have also, messaged me asking for advice and stuff. So yeah, I'm just gonna kind of walk through that. The main thing is founders are super important for startups, and I feel like people over obsess over the ideas that they're working on, but they fail to realize that ideas are malleable, and especially with the rate that AI is moving, it's very important for you to be adaptive. If you feel that the product you're building is not something people want, and it's not going somewhere, then you should make that call to pivot, to pivot into a new idea. And I feel that the most important thing for companies is co-founders relationships, because that's ultimately what decides, the state of the company, and how you can stick through each other during your toughest times. um, I'm just going to go back to this to see if there's any questions. um, but yeah, I'm just going to continue to the next slide. So YC is, everyone knows what YC is. Obviously, they give you $500,000 and it's a 3-month program. Um, but one thing that people fail to understand is it's not about the money, it's about the community and the network that you get, right? So you will be assigned a partner who is built several companies in the past and been in your shoes. So if there's a specific thing where you're stuck on, you can ask, him in office hours or Slack, and they will give you advice from the perspective of a founder, which is really hard to get. Um, and yeah, that's a very cool thing about YC is that all the YC partners have been ex YC founders, so they really know what it takes to build a successful company, and hence they're able to help you. However, at the same point, it's still your company and you have to run it, right? They're not going to handhold you to success. And with that being said, even with YC, the chances of a startup succeeding are really, really low. So it is a very, very hard journey. But what matters is that you're confident and you don't give up, right? I think these are the two traits that every founder needs, um, to actually succeed and to be able to build something. And another thing is fundraising, right? So you have demo day and you raise money, but I think people mistake raising money for building a successful company, which is not the case. And what's really important is that you focus on the product, you focus on the customers, and that's all that matters. Um, and YC helps you take away the pressure of fundraising because of its network, and really lets you, drill into your product and your company for 3 months, without any distractions. So that's more about the program. And then, kind of the main things said in a simple manner is, just make something people want, which is very easy or said than done, as it involves speaking to users, understanding what they need, building the features, building the product, prioritizing what to build, what not to build. And ultimately it comes down to having someone paying for your product, right? Because that validates the need and that validates the fact that this is something people want. And then, yeah, you have to obviously talk to your users, forever, essentially, right? No matter how big your company gets, if your customers are unhappy, your company is not going to survive long term. And another thing which YC really teaches you is doing things that don't scale. So in our case, we had to do cold calls, we had to reach out to people, or we emailed cold emails, go to events, try and, get people off guard after the event finishes, and really figuring out who the decision maker is for the company you're building. So that is something really important, that you also kind of need to learn to do. And this is a very famous quote by Paul Graham, which, says that 100 people who love your product beats a million people who sort of like it. And you want to really get people who are champions for your product and really like it, right? And you want to try and find those 100 people as soon as possible, because you learn two things. Either you'll learn that your company is making something that is useful, and then you can decide how to grow and, scale further, or you'll learn that you're building something which is perhaps not something that people are willing to pay for and need, and you can then decide whether you need to pivot or, change your approach to your startup. So this should be like a very important thing people need to understand. Quality users is greater than quantity. So yeah, that's another learning I had. Another thing is people building in stealth, and, people building in private, not sharing it in public. I personally feel that ideas are easy to get but hard to execute. And if you're afraid that someone's gonna, you know, steal your idea, that is simply not true, because they do not have the grit and the resilience that you have. So, and they would not bleed for your product and your idea as much as, you would. So you should really just launch as soon as possible, because that opens up more data points for you to get feedback, to understand what your customers want, and to really get to a product that makes sense sooner. So yeah, this is the biggest advice he also gives to all the companies in the batch, to launch even earlier during the batch rather than later, because that also affects the timelines and how much attention you can get. So yeah, this is something which I would highly recommend everyone. um, Now, AI has shifted a lot of things with YC and in general with startups. And one thing I've been noticing is, after 2023, the ChatGPT boom, companies started building, GPT wrappers and tools that people use. But now we're entering a new phase where AI can do so many of these things, and even the foundational models like Claude and OpenAI are, providing video gen tools, image tools, and like they're just able to do so many general tasks. What really matters now is building almost an operating system or an AI employee, right? Where you give your product several sub agents which can complete different tasks. So that is something which is like super important, and it will really help you, automate various workflows for a company rather than just giving them a tool. And AI is also shifting to this place where it's now about just getting things done, and having the human in the loop for reviews. But AI is able to independently execute a lot of these tasks. So some things which people kind of, yeah, as I mentioned earlier, right? Fundraising is not success, right? It's just a pathway for you to get fuel to run your company. And another thing is, as I said, revenue is the only thing which you should focus on, and actual customer usage. Another thing is believing that your first idea is the one you want to, take till you succeed. That is hard because it does not always have to be the case, and many successful startups have pivoted multiple times before they've reached um, like any sort of significant milestone. And as I mentioned earlier, co-founder dynamics is super, super important. Another thing people don't talk about is I feel social media has kind of glamorized this idea of being a founder and everyone's building something, but they fail to realize how hard it is to actually be doing it. And one thing I would say is don't do things which look cool on paper or look cool on social media, but actually focus on building useful products and focusing on your startup, which means being isolated if it needs to for some days. Another thing I've realized is, founder marketing, social media marketing works when you are an expert in your field. Doing generic, day in the life videos may not get you that reach or that particular audience. So you want to start making content tailored to whichever, domain your startup is in. And another thing is a startup is a long journey. It's a marathon, it's not a race. So you need to have a lot of patience. And for you to survive, you need to have people, especially your co-founders, who will be with you throughout this journey. Yeah, another thing I would say is your ideal customer profile should be really, really narrow. You should make sure that you're targeting a specific niche, right? For example, I'm now working on AI e-commerce operations, so I'm only targeting, footwear businesses who are selling on different platforms. It's a very niche audience rather than, having, let's say, all apparel and clothing brands and all footwear brands, which is a larger segment. So you really want to find a small group of people who really love your product, as that'll give you signal to then expand and grow. So that's something which is super important, even for YC interviews. They'll drill you on that and make sure like you know where you're starting with. Another thing is, um, AI usage is really good, but it also does not mean that you need to use AI for everything. You should use it to almost run your company, right? Like emailing, messaging, drafting documents and stuff. But you should be in charge of your company, of the decisions you're making, and where the product is headed. So you should, have a very good balance there. And another thing, the final thing is, if you're doing something which does not help you get more revenue or get you more users or whatever metric you're targeting, then you should not be pursuing that activity, because it just is a waste of time and resources which are already very limited for startups. I'm just gonna go back and see if people have questions. Okay, so question is, yeah, what do you guys do there? Building and enhancing the product or understanding how to go market? For YC, each company is very different, right? You have early stage companies who are even pre-idea or just have an idea. They have very little users, so they spend a lot of their time kind of just speaking to users, figuring out what to build. But one thing that is a constant throughout the batch and even after first startup is building the product, right? That should be the core of it. And depending on how many co-founders you have, you can kind of split up tasks where one person does sales, one person does the coding, which is usually the split. However, for YC, I would recommend like it's ideally the best time to do YC when you already have a lot of traction because you can then use the bash to scale, use the network and get more users. Whereas if you're really early on, you may fall into this pivot hell, which is also okay, but it just leads to you not being able to make the most out of the batch where you have access to all these peers who are also founders and YC partners and VCs who can kind of help you scale your company. So that's what I would answer for that question. Yeah, feel free to write more questions. I'll just pop by and take them on. But kind of continuing on these slides, the kind of main message is to make something that people really want, right? As I mentioned earlier, for our experience with our company, we were initially obviously doing right AI video UGC, and then we pivoted to video editing. So we started speaking to videographers, and we understood that creating videos for companies to edit their wedding footage takes a lot of time because they have hours of videos, and it's a very slow process. So we decided to build an editor for them. But then after working on that for a bit, we realized the willingness to pay is really high, or sorry, it's not really low, and people are just videographers are not willing to pay enough for a tool, and they already have Adobe Premiere and other tools. So yeah, I kind of then decided to pivot from this kind of idea, and then I started doing e-commerce because I kind of have a deep tie as my parents have been in the industry for 30 years, and the e-commerce market in general, in terms of operations, is very repetitive and manual. So I would say like if you're trying to find an idea to work on, you should focus on really looking at areas where there's repetitive work and something which can be automated by AI. And as I mentioned earlier, right, like AI employees is kind of the future. So if you're choosing a vertical, you essentially want to understand different pain points and build tools and agents that can solve them for the user. Um, Another thing I personally did is not being afraid to reach out, right? So even before getting into YC, I really was open. I posted a lot on LinkedIn, and I feel like LinkedIn is a great tool um, to just meet more people, find connections, even find potential clients. And there's a lot you can get out of it. Your network is really, really powerful and it can help you uh, grow and really make the most out of whatever people and whatever products you want to build. So that's something which was super useful to me. And another thing I would say is you're never too early and you're never too uh, naive to start a company. So what you need to know is you have the technical skills and you have to find areas where there's a specific problem. Now, founder market fit does help. So in my case, the fact that I have a deep tie with the e-commerce industry does help because I can, have a lot more understanding as I had my first internship in that space. Um, and this is also something important for YC because they kind of ask you about why do you think you are the best person to build this product. So there's a couple of questions that YC asks you, right? It's actually pretty straightforward, but the way you answer is really important. So they'll ask you, what are you building? How many customers you have? Who are you targeting? Why are you the right people to build this product? What happens if this doesn't work, right? What is your pivot strategy? Uh, what is your like plan for the next few weeks? When do you think the product is going to be live, right? These are some of the questions like they would ask you. Again, it's tailored toward your company and what type of product you're building, but these are some of the things which you should keep in mind. And answering very concisely is important. So you don't want to go rambling because that'll just eat up your time as you only have 10 minutes, and you should rather focus on keeping your answers super concise and making sure that you're only like um answering what they're asking for. And sometimes it's better to like not give the full answer and let them question you again if they have a doubt. That's particularly the format I would pursue. And yeah, always remember that YC is just one pathway, right? It's not like the destination at all. It's an accelerator which can help you build a successful company faster. However, the one thing you should do without or with YC is focusing on the product, focusing on the users, and yeah, like not being distracted. But yeah, I'm just gonna open it up to questions now. Kind of, shared my journey going from scratch, from being an international student to now, being an SF and then doing a startup. Uh, so yeah, I'm gonna watch the comment section for some questions. And happy to, go in depth into more of these things. But while I wait, another thing I would like to add is that I've obviously got a lot of DMs from Instagram, people asking whether my startup idea is good or not. I feel that the only way you can answer that is by validating the market, and validation and building should happen in parallel. So you should keep building features and giving it to users, and you should ask them to pay you upfront. So one model you could use is a paid trial, uh, rather than giving them for free, because when people use a product for free, they tend to like not give honest feedback, and they may mislead you into this idea that, oh yeah, your product is good or it's nice, right? That is something which does not help. So you want to focus on metrics, and I feel charging upfront is one of the best ways to filter out users who may not be giving you the most valuable feedback and will not help you, building a successful company. So that is something I'd keep in mind. Another thing I would add is, for anyone who's applying to IC, or has applied, keeping your application really concise is important, and making sure that you show why you guys or your founders are the right people to build this product. And there's usually two type of companies who get in, right? So the first type of company is where the founders are usually having a really strong background. They either have a FANG or like a top university. Uh, Another kind of subset of people are those who have a lot of traction. They may not necessarily be from a named university or company, but they have a deep tie to the product they're building and they already have a lot of revenue or customers. So you want to identify which bucket you fall into and accordingly kind of tailor your application, because um, this does really affect how you're evaluated and what ends up happening. um, and I would say you're never too early to apply. Many companies have gotten in, even just an idea with no users. So I would say be confident in yourself. You are probably more capable than you think you are, and make sure you choose a team wisely. Ideally, if you're friends, that does help because your relationship is already strong from before. And yeah, just focus on the right things and don't get distracted by things that don't matter. But that's pretty much everything I had to share about my journey, doing startups and building a company. So yeah, if there's no other questions, we can call it a day. And for those who are also participating in Jack Hacks, we're gonna have more sessions like these. And feel free to comment down in the Discord if you have any other questions or concerns, and we're happy to answer them. And yeah, we're super excited to see what everyone's building. The deadline to submit to DevPost is on May 19 at 10 a.m. EST, or EDT. So yeah, just keep an eye on that. We're also going to be hosting office hours soon with Jason. Uh, so you guys can get more hands-on conversations and ask for any feedback or any other things you want before you guys start building and using Jack to create different products. But yeah, it was great chatting and sharing my experience. So yeah, see you guys later. Bye bye.